does not look good if you're going to be fighting Hwoarang. And if you're using Hwoarang, that looks great, right? So again, welcome to Open Hwoarang Lessons 15. Today's lesson is the RFS F4 or right flamingo stance forward 4 mix-up. In more detail, basically. So let's get on with it. And we need to talk about RFS F4, obviously, when the title of the lesson is RFS F4 Mixup or RFS F4 Mix. So what is RFS F4? This move is an I8 high. That's right, you heard me right there. It's a 8 frame high. That's +3 on hit, +1 on block, and +7 on counter hit. Just looking on that on paper alone does not look good if you're going to be fighting Hwoarang. And if you're using Hwoarang, that looks great, right? But of course, if you're fighting Hwoarang, that is not, you do not want to see. But it's also locked into stance. It's only in right flamingo. And these are more or less the moves that transition to right flamingo. Again, note that all the moves that transition to right flamingo are not listed here. This is just to give you a general idea of what moves transition to right flamingo. So here you can see a common one like 1-2-4, down back 4 forward, down 3-4, RFF DF4 forward, RFF 4 forward, RFF 2-4 forward. You get the point. So yes, if Hwoarang is using one of these moves, he's more or less going to be pulling out RFS F4 and you can't really interrupt it. Why can't you really interrupt it? It's simple, really. If we look at the common RFS transitions like 1-2-4, down back 4 forward, down 3-4, and RFF DF4 forward, you can look at their frame data as more or less high, normal or high. High in regards for down 3-4 being +8 on block, RFF DF4 being +7 on block, down back 4 forward being only +1, and 1-2-4 being +3. So those two are in the lower end, while down 3-4 and RFF DF4 are in the higher end, right? So RFS F4 is 8 frames. And the next fastest move in right flamingo is RFS 2, which is the flamingo jab, which is +5 on block. And if we compare those two, before we compare those two, right? A general sidestep tip is that you can more or less step your opponent if they're around -5 to +5. So let's say the move your opponent did is -5, you can more or less step an option. And it's risky if you're +6 and up. So if we go back to the slide, against 1-2-4 and down back 4 forward, you can more or less step the option. If they're using RFS 2 instead of RFS F4, we're going to get the RFS F4 in a bit. We'll go back to that cheese. But against down 3-4 and RFF DF4, it's quite risky to step versus it. Even if you can step RFS 2 in that scenario, it's still risky because you'll get caught by other options that track, most especially at that frame. But against +3, +1, you have more leeway to step if the range is from -5 to +5, right? So yeah, that's more or less a general sidestep tip. And where does this all tie into? This ties into, again, to what I was mentioning earlier about RFS F4 and RFS 2. So RFS 2 is a 13 frame high. And if we look at the scenario of 1-2-4, which is +3, it becomes a 10 frame jab. And since RFS F4 on its own is an 8 frame high, it becomes a 5 frame high. So let's go back to the game to demonstrate. So I have Hwoarang on block here. If I do 1-2-4, that's +3. You can see it's clearly +3. And if I do F4, it's 8 frames. And if I do jab, it's 13 frames. But it's +3, so now it's 10, right? So to demonstrate those two moves, I'll have Hwoarang here do 1-2-4, and then 1-2-4-2. And you'll notice what will trade and what will not. Against RFS F4, you cannot challenge. You cannot even trade with it. You're going to lose. You're going to get counter hit. And the game says he's +16, +7. Well, he's again +7 on counter hit. And you can't jab that. And jab's one of your fastest standing moves at I10. It's a 10 frame jab. If we bring that over to RFS 2, you're supposed to trade in this scenario. And there you go. That's what happens. Since the 1-2-4 transition is +3 and RFS 2 is 13 frames, that's 13 minus... That's +3. So that's 13 minus 3. No. That's 13 minus by 3. That's 10. So therefore, the 10 frame trade exists. But that does not exist versus RFS F4, you can never, because it's 8 versus 10, and since 124 is +3, that's 5 versus 10. That scenario, however, is very different compared to LFS, because LFS doesn't have any other move that's fast aside from LFS 1 and LFS forward 2+3, which is a throw. So that's 12 frames and 13 frames respectively. And again, if we go over, since it's also 123 is +3 on block, that means LFS 1 is 10 frames and LFS forward 2+3 is 9 frames. So if I jab trade again, you'll jab trade with LFS 1 if he enters 123, and then if you do a jab, I believe, against 1243, you can still throw tech, but you'll lose. Even if the jab comes out. Because again, it's 1 frame faster. So that's just to cover that scenario. We'll go back to the slides. So this is the most important part you need to know about RFS F4 compared to the left flamingo side of things, because left flamingo has a 9 frame and a 10 frame move after 123, while 124 right flamingo has a 5 frame move and a 10 frame move. Very, very different worlds. And you can still throw tech the throw even if it's starting up at 9 frames after 123. So what does the RFS F4 situation then look like? Previously, you see that second bullet right there, low crush, high crush option with RFS F4, that didn't exist before. It did not. What existed was low crushing and high crushing option with RFS 3. You could still control the situation with RFS F4, albeit it was controlled with quotations without a forward 4 existing. Airblade, the new Season 4 move. But since Airblade now exists in Season 4, this scenario more or less looks something like this. So if your opponent doesn't like that, they need to high crush it, because that's the only way they can beat RFS F4. They're gonna lose to Airblade. Just like that. I think that works for down 2 too, right? Yeah, it also works for down 2. Yeah, and they're always just gonna lose. Regardless of the button they press, RFS up forward 4 will cleanly beat it. And if they remain to choose standing and want to press a button while standing, or their evasive boot, like I'm gonna press back 1 after RFS F4, I'm gonna still get caught by RFS F4 again, because it's an 8 frame move, and since it's +1 on block, it still becomes a 7 frame move. It's still really, really fast, and you really can't do anything about it. So that's what the scenario looks like. So if I put him on block, more or less the situation could end up something like this. You could literally be standing there with RFS F4 and it's big trouble. And then they can stand switch, and this is what I mean by control. For as long as you make sure you're using a move that has that still transitions you to right flamingo, you can keep doing RFS F4 and keep them thinking about it and force them to high crush you early. So let's look at the classic scenario at the wall. RFF DF4 RFS 2 is very, very classic, certified cheese at this point. You can mix this up with RFS forward 4 now, and it becomes quite different. Of course, if you get the RFS 2, you reset a +5, which is great, but that's been covered way before, and a lot of players know that. So how about you do RFF D4 into RFS F4? A lot different now. And if they attempt to press a button, you can get the full launch in RFS F4, and that's going to wall splat, or you'll get RFS up forward 4, which will also wall splat. And if not, then they don't press a button, like let's say they don't press against RFF D4 to RFS 2, and they don't press here, you can simply just do RFS 2 again, and then you're in +5, or you can do RFS 4 and then stand switch and then down 3-4, or the RFS F4 stand switch 3 forward, LFS 3-4. Again, the options are unlimited. There's so many things you can really do with this move and this scenario. Most especially, they gave you a move that's only -13 and more or less does its job to help cover the mix-up. So why did I cover sidestepping earlier, right? Why did I cover sidestepping earlier? Again, so we have Hwoarang standing guard here. I'll tell him to step to the right, right? Because you're supposed to step towards to the right versus right flamingo. And more or less, you're supposed to be stepping Hwoarang to the right in general. So I have him set here. I'm going to do RFS F4, and then I'm going to do RFS 2. Again, remember, the situation where you can step is -5 to +5. And since RFS F4 on its own is +1, he should more or less be able to step it in theory and on paper. And just like so, it's now true. It's practical. Just step right. But what if Hwoarang did RFS F4 again at +1? So that's an I7 frame move. I'm pretty sure I screwed up that word. I butchered that word. But again, it's an I7 move. That's a high. Same as RFS 2. That's a high. You should still be, again, the general tip rule is that you can step at -5 to +5, more or less, but since he has a 7-frame or 8-frame move at currently 7, since it's +1, right? How would it turn out? Oh, you don't. So you can't evade it. So let's say I change it to step left. Let's see if Hwoarang can step left. Oh, he can't. Oh, okay. What about sidewalk left? Oh, still no. Sidewalk right? Still no. Again, that's because they still remain standing. So what about backdash? How long would it take for Hwoarang's backdash to get out of the RFS F4 situation? You see there, he's stepping. He's trying to get out of the situation. And you can see he's slowly inching out. But how long will it take for him to get out of the situation safely? And as you notice, we're getting, I don't know, quite close to the wall. And all I'm doing is just pressing F4 over and over again. And I ended it right there. But as you can see, it seems like Hwoarang could keep him forever if he so wished. And drag him all the way to the wall and then just run the mix-up. That's how strong RFS F4 is now. And if at any point the opposing Hwoarang wanted to get out, he had to press a high crushing move. That's his only option. That's how the RFS F4 situation looks for Hwoarang. What if you're on the other side, which is the opposing Hwoarang? So what can you do? What's the anti-RFS F4 option then? High crush, as I mentioned earlier, use a really good evasive move, or backdash and SS duck. High crushing is the only thing you can do because, again, it's an 8-frame move or essentially a 7-frame move versus a 10-frame jab. So that rules out your fastest standing move if you're a character who doesn't have an 8-frame or a 9-frame move. But even if you had another 8-frame or a 9-frame move yourself, Hwoarang's at 7 because he's +1 on block and you're -1 on block. So the best option for you to do is high crush the move. So if you block RFS F4, what you're supposed to do is do a down jab or basic down 4. Then if you have a really good evasive move, like if you lab the RFS F4 situation so in, then you'll be able to get out of it. As you saw earlier, Hwoarang's back 1 didn't stand a chance of evading RFS F4. However, there are a few characters in this game who have a chance of evading RFS F4, which opens the mix-up in a whole different way when Hwoarang's fighting those characters. And even if you have good or bad movement, not unless you're a big character, backdashing and SS duck are viable options for you. So even if he does RFS F4 once, if you SS duck, then you'll be able to avoid the next RFS F4. And if you have a full crouch move or a full crouch low, you should go for it and get the counter hit. So again, to beat it, what you do is basic down 4. Or you do a down jab. Stuff like that. So that's the high crush option. What's an evasive move that Asuka has that can beat this situation? Well, you'd be surprised. It's down back 1. And that beats out also a lot of other options for Hwoarang's RFS F4 situation. Because again, it's only +1 on block. So all the moves that he has in right flamingo are affected by the +1. So even if this is a 7-frame move now on block, because RFS F4 itself is +1, it still affects the rest of his moves. And since the next fastest move he has is 13 frames and it's only +1 on block, that means it becomes a 12-frame jab. So he's still not exactly safe in that regard. He needs you to hesitate to hold your button so that he can stance switch and press something safer or safely get out of right flamingo. Because again, he's still in flamingo. He can't block. Every time he does RFS F4, he cannot block. So he needs to again reset himself back into a stance where he can block, which is LFS or RFF. And if he does a move like RFS DF4, 17 frames, again, that's only +1, so it's still 16. It's still gonna be slow, and down back 1 has high chance of beating it on block. So if your evasive move also, so you have to check if your evasive move beats RFS F4, and that checks the list for Asuka, it beats RFS F4. So does it also beat RFS up forward 4? That's important because that's how she's gonna have to be dealing with the RFS F4 mix-up. So we'll just put it here, RFS F4. Oh, and it beats also RFS up forward 4. So she's already in a good spot because these are the two main moves Hwoarang's going to be using in the RFS F4 mix-up more often than not, because that's the only move that reliably beats and gives good reward for beating a high crushing option. And then SS duck. So, again, step to the right. It's gonna be difficult, but you need to do it. So, block, SS. There you go, I got it. I got the SS duck right there. More often than not, you're gonna get hit, but if you get it right, you'll be able to get that duck I was able to get. I even slightly moved towards the right. There you go, just like that. That's an SS duck. And of course, backdashing, you just have to keep holding back. And just pray you'll be able to get out. Or they stop, right? But I've tested it before. There are certain backdashes, especially characters with really good backdashes, they will be able to get out eventually. But that's like after how many RFS F4s? It's a lot of RFS F4s. So yeah, that's how the anti-option is handled. So just like Asuka's down back 1, 2 against RFS F4 and RFS F4, what you have to do in order to lab that situation for your character is put RFS F4, RFS F4. Again, this is all after RFS F4 and block. So make sure you do 1, 2, 4, RFS F4, and then another RFS F4. That's the first thing you need to record. The second thing you need to record is RFS F4 into RFS F4. The third thing you need to record is RFS F4 into RFS back 4, and then RFS F4 into RFS down 4-3, and then RFS F4 into RFS 1 or RFS DF4. And I probably missed RFS 2, so you include RFS 2 in that, so that's 6 moves you have to test for that you can beat on block after RFS F4. You need to win a good number of those options to justify using that evasive move, or that specific option to beat RFS F4 and RFS F4. If you lose to RFS back 4, it's more or less fine. But if you lose to too many other options, which most likely you shouldn't, you'll be fine. But the two things you really want to beat more often than not would be RFS F4 and RFS F4. And Asuka, in her case, can beat both. So again, if you're a Hwoarang player, please take note of the moves that enter right flamingo and use it to full extent, because most of these moves on block aren't that bad frame data wise. They're all very good frame data wise. They're either +3 and up. The only thing that's negative on block is up back 3-4, and a jab always wins in that situation. You can't RFS F4 your way out of it. You can if they don't press a jab. That's the only thing you'll win at. If they press a move that isn't 10 frames after up back 3-4, then RFS F4 would win. But if they press something that's, if they press the jab, right, you're gonna lose even if you press RFS F4. And that's big trouble if you're against a character with a really strong 10 frame punish like Heihachi, Kazuya, Devil Jin, etc. They're gonna 1-1-2 your butt or 2-4 your butt. Okay. So again, if you're also, so that's for Hwoarang's side. And then if you're, again, going anti-Hwoarang, take note of all the moves that enter right flamingo, because RFS F4 is going to hit you. It's going to come out. And you need to be prepared for it, because if you're going to jab against right flamingo, you are taking a risk immediately. And that risk is far higher compared to jabbing against left flamingo. The risk is very, very different. And lab the situation as much as you can. Just as I mentioned earlier, the 6 moves you need to record after an RFS F4 on block. If you get hit by RFS F4, whatever you do not press a button, do not go wild, just hold back and guess on the next RFS F4 if they do another RFS F4. If they do another move, which is like maybe RFS 2, that's the second mix-up. And I go over this in the anti-Hwoarang guide, which you can check out. For YouTube, the card will turn up here. On Facebook, the link will be in the description. So again, the second mix-up. The second mix-up is always important. So you can always get out on the second mix-up. So they do RFS F4, then RFS 2, you can get out. Get out as fast as you can. SSR duck, SSR block, backdash, etc. Do whatever you can to stop and neutralize the situation. Go back to neutral, space out Hwoarang or whatnot. Do what you need to do to beat Hwoarang, basically. But if you're stuck in RFS F4, lab the situation, know what moves you can do, etc. for your character. So again, that was the lesson for the day. That was the RFS F4 mix. Most especially on block. More often than not on block. It's not usually going to be on hit. So that was Open Hwoarang Lessons 15. And that's been the cheese. Thank you for watching. Am I getting that right? I-12. Yeah. I think I am. 11, 10, 9. Right, I am. You gotta get that math in. It's math.